This is House Planning Help episode 93. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you want to learn about constructing new homes or upgrading existing dwellings. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century. My personal goal is to create an energy-efficient home before I turn 40 in August 2016. Coming up in this session, my guest is Tad Everhart. He's an energy advisor from Portland, Oregon. We hear his story of building a house only to retrofit it a few years on. It's an interesting story, isn't it? An idea. So we'll find out why he did that. Before we get going, I wanted to say a quick hello. And I've mentioned this in a previous podcast that I'm looking to build up a portfolio of energy efficient properties as an investment. This is a long-term goal, and it started with just getting a few properties that I don't consider very good buildings, but I'm learning about being an investor. And one way I've done that is to check out a podcast called The Property Podcast, hosted by the two Robs. It's very good, lots of interesting information. I'll link this into the show notes at the bottom of today's podcast, houseplanninghelp.com/93. And I went to one of their meetups, and not only did I meet a fantastic bunch of people, but also someone who listened to this podcast, which I thought was quite bizarre just to bump into them there. So hi, Gary. Well done you for sticking with me all the way through. You said you listened right from the beginning, so I really appreciate that. And I thought I should give you a mention in this podcast in case I bump into you at a later meetup. I'd love it to be a meetup for this podcast, and I think they're very worthwhile. It's always good for meeting other people with similar passions and sharing knowledge. It's just I don't think I can quite get a handle on this yet. It's going to have to be a back burner idea. We will get to it eventually because I know that they are so valuable, meeting up with other people, like-minded people. Let's move on to our feature interview today. My guest is energy advisor Tad Everhart. He's a lovely guy, as you're about to hear. He's based in Portland, out in the States. And normally when you build a house, hopefully once you've finished, you just settle into it and relax. Probably 101 little jobs that need doing. Hopefully it's mainly relax. Not if you're Tad, because he has been constantly thinking, well, I could do this. And you'll hear why he decided 10 years after building the house, it was time to retrofit it. I started by asking him how he got interested in ecological construction.
My brother was a contractor in college, working his way through college in summers, and my parents were always fixing things up. They added on to their house when I was a kid. After the energy crisis in the U.S. in the 70s, my dad built a solar office building that my sister designed, and it had thicker walls than code required, and he was kind of a pioneer in that. So I guess I come at it from that view. And then I was just a traditional builder for about 8 years. And by training, I'm a lawyer, and I've been a lawyer for 28 years. So I've had first a legal career, then a career as a builder, then back to being a lawyer. And I'm very conscious of the environmental challenges that we face. So in 2008, I heard from a friend who is a very experienced green builder about Passivhaus, and looked at this and said, wow, buildings that don't need a heat source, that's wonderful, and took a training and took it from there.
What I was interested about, that you told me that you built a house to begin with,
Yeah.
and then you retrofitted it at a later date. So we're not going to go too far yet, but how was that experience of building your own house?
Oh, building my own house was great. Actually, I've built 2 houses for myself. When you're a builder and you're building on a speculative basis, if you complete a house and you can't sell it, oftentimes you end up buying it yourself. And that's how I built the first house that I lived in. It was our first project. We built it in 1992 and didn't sell right away, and it's a good value, so I bought that. And then met my wife, and we were going to start a family, so we built a second house in 1998, and it was kind of our dream house. Building it was not a great experience. A lot of things went wrong, but we designed it. It was in a neighborhood where we had been building houses. It's actually one of 10 houses in a subdivision that my brother and I developed. And the process is difficult. As a builder, and having employed these subcontractors for years and paid them regularly and complimented them on their work, I thought they would rise to the challenge and build like an extra special building for me. And the plumber messed up and flooded the house. The electrician drilled through a structural beam, and it was just not a happy situation. And actually, that was one of the things that caused me to leave the building career and go back to being a lawyer. So, but the house turned out great. I mean, it was a wonderful house in 1998, pretty energy efficient for its time, which made it all the more painful to start taking it apart only 10 years later when only a small fraction of it was paid for.
Do you still live there now?
Yes. We have to live there a long time to enjoy what we've created and to pay for it.
Once you had the house up, when was that first realization that you could go further, or perhaps that you had to go further, you really wanted to? What was that motivation to retrofit it?
Oh, well, the motivation to retrofit it was really an accident. I took the training in 2008 to become a Passivhaus consultant, and I was the first person in Oregon to take it. And I was, like everyone in our initial class of 30 people, I was just on fire. This is great. We all need to start doing this. This is the only way to build buildings. And so I immediately looked for a plot of land where we could build a demonstration passive house. And my brother was still general contractor, and we looked, and we had brokers finding property for us. And at that point, we were about ready to tip into the housing crisis, and everyone could see it coming who was watching. And so I didn't really want to tie up $100,000 on a lot that was going to be worth half that a year later and invest all this money in something that might not really fetch the value. And so, I spent about 6 to 9 months looking for a lot, and then just finally concluded that was, we actually made some offers on lots and went out and negotiated. And finally I was talking to my wife, and, I said, we have a lot of equity in the house because we built it ourselves. We only owed like a quarter of its value, and we might as well enjoy it. And as a lawyer, I'm always conscious of liability. It's kind of like a lot of this stuff is not really well developed yet. So if we did it on our own house, we would be the victims of any mistakes, and we would not be having to worry about being sued by someone. And so we started talking about that and developing plans to retrofit it, and everything fell into place. It was easy for us to get financing. We had a lot of equity. We were able to get a home equity loan to borrow, a bit more. And my brother agreed to donate his services as a general contractor. A couple carpenters were intrigued. We met with them. They're like, well, maybe Tad's crazy, but it kind of sounds interesting, So we dived in, and as all things go, we didn't start at the right time. I got certified by January 2009. The process of trying to find a good lot took 6 or 9 months. So it wasn't until September, the first day of school, that we started taking apart our house. And of course, that's one good month of building weather, and then the rainy season starts. So
you mentioned some of the issues that you had around finding a lot. It's a similar situation that I'm going through at the moment, trying to find land in the UK and being in a place that's really in a good distance to commute into London. It's really, really hard. So what were the issues? Why was it taking so long? Was it just the price? You were trying to get something that was a bargain?
No, there were either lots that didn't have a good orientation, that were very expensive, that were close in the neighborhoods where we wanted to live, because both my wife and I commute downtown to work by bike, and we wanted to kind of stay in our neighborhood because our kids were in schools. Or it was to go out to neighborhoods where lots were less expensive, and the worry was that if we built a house in those neighborhoods, those might be people that would never be environmentally conscious enough to appreciate the value of a passive house. So we would spend all this extra money to build it and then not be able to recover that. So everything kind of started pointing to just do your own house for us.
I imagine it's a massive benefit when you're doing a retrofit that you've built the house yourself.
It's a massive benefit, but it's also incredibly painful because we had a 30-year mortgage. So I think we had paid the mortgage down from like $120 down to about $70,000. And all of a sudden it was kind of like, you know what? In 15 years, we could have the house all paid off, or we could put all this money into it and not have the house paid off for another 30 years. It's kind of like, I'm not young. I mean, we started this project when I was, 54, I guess. But my wife was really pretty supportive. She said, you definitely want to do this, and you're not going to be happy unless you do it. And it's important to do it. So it's bad from tearing apart things that you created. It's really an asset, though, because you know exactly what's there. And when you retrofit buildings, most times, you have no idea or no certainty about what's behind the finishes. I had the benefit of having seen all of that 10 years and photographed it. So
I almost want to jump the story to find out whether you're happy with everything that you've done at the end, but all in good time.
Yeah.
What have you done to the house?
Originally, what we were going to do is add 10 inches. I guess for you folks in the UK, that's about 22.
That's all right. We can work in inches. Inches is good.
Can you work in inches?
We can. We're very multi-skilled, maybe.
Okay, well, coming out of the Passivhaus training where we're all on a freak show with feet, pounds, and inches. It's 10 inches. Originally, it was going to be 8 inches, and then we ran the software, and we wanted to achieve the Passivhaus standard, so we thickened it to 10 inches. We knew that wouldn't make any difference. So the idea was that we would just add 10 inches to the outside of the walls on all 4 sides of the house. We would get new windows, Passivhaus quality windows, and we would put in a heat recovery ventilator because at the same time we're doing all that, we'd make the house more airtight. So it was a relatively defined scope of work. And then what happened, as all remodeling projects do, I'm told, the scope expanded almost exponentially because we took off the sheetrock, it'd be your lath and plaster on the inside of the walls to resize the windows, and found that the fiberglass insulation had already signs of water damage. You could see that moisture was condensing on it and dripping, and it was discolored. We could see air leaks through the walls where you could tell that air was bringing not only moisture, but probably contaminants because the pink fiberglass bats were stained. And at that point, we kind of said, we're taking so much sheetrock off the inside of the walls anyway, let's just take it all off, except for the kitchen and the bathrooms where we didn't really want to do too much work. So in the end, we took off the sheetrock off the inside of the walls on 90% of the house.
Can I just jump in there for a second? Because this installation, presumably the first time round, you would have been keen to get it right. So in 10 years, something that you've overseen, did that concern you at all?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, we followed standard building practice. Every part of the construction was inspected and approved by the building official. It just goes to show you that the standard building practices don't result in a building with durability. And that was on the inside. On the outside, actually, the house is in pretty good shape. We took extra time taking the wood siding off the building in a way that we could reuse most of it. And ultimately, we were able to reuse about 60% of it. It's not great looking because it's got some nail holes, but over time, as you paint it, it's looking just fine. So the first part of the project was, we've got $80,000. We're going to build these Larson trusses, 10 inches thick, put them around the house, and fill them full of cellulose insulation. At the same time, we can see that we've got to take the bats out of the inside, so we'll blow in cellulose on the inside of the walls. And that part of the project was kind of a discrete part, and it went well, but it was very costly. And so at that point, in about 4 months, we had that process completed. We had the new windows in. We had the new sheetrock on the inside of the walls, the Larson trusses on the outside, and our money was gone. Because we had 5 carpenters working, and we were paying them pretty much from $25 an hour to $40 an hour. And it goes fast when you got 5 carpenters working.
That's just the walls?
That's just the walls. So the money's spent, and then it became kind of the do-it-yourself endurance marathon, because the money's spent, and we had more money, but it's kind of like, wow, you can spend that much money that fast? What could you do in a year? We can't do that. So we, on our own, air sealed the attic and insulated the attic, all but the last part, which was to hire someone to blow in insulation. But we did all the air sealing ourselves, a lot of the special insulation around the perimeter of the roof where it's hard to get a sufficient depth and thickness of insulation. And then we went into the crawl space. So we have
What's that? I'm not sure whether this is just something...
you don't have... in UK, as like in the eastern part of the US, in the Midwest, most houses either are built on a concrete slab right on the ground, or they're built above a basement. We have what are basically miniature basements, about a meter tall, and that just allows air to circulate under the house so there's no moisture. And that's because we have wood floors. So I crawled under there, and that's why it's called a crawl space. There's only about 2 feet of room for you to crawl around, and this insulation was just awful. It was fiberglass, so every time you went down there, you got covered with this itchy, dirty stuff. And we kind of concluded it was best just to get rid of all of it. So one horrible day, I put on full body armor, basically, went down there, ripped it all out, brought it out. There's just a kind of a hole in the floor in a closet where you can lift everything out. We filled half of our garage with it. My wife put a notice on Craigslist, and someone came and fortunately took all of it for insulating their garage. And then we cleaned it. It was a lot of work to clean it. We wiped it down, vacuumed it, and then air sealed it. We got caulk and sealed all the seams in the plywood. So it was actually pretty airtight, but we made it as airtight as possible. And then we bought 207 blocks of EPS foam. And the floor is plywood on top of 2-inch wide by 10-inch deep lumber joists.
We'll get some pictures that we can put into the show notes just to make this clear, because sometimes when we're talking about things, we can visualize it here, and then other people thinking, what?
All right. So the floor joists are just the boards on edge that support the floor, and they're about 1.5 feet apart. And so all the styrofoam blocks were cut at the factory to fit between those boards. And so we basically laid on our back, and my youngest daughter, who was, 8 at the time, she was the best worker in the crawl space because she was small.
So you're under the house,
yes,
looking up and attaching it just with, how are you attaching it to the house?
So at first we thought we'd just push them up into place and then shoot around them with liquid expanding foam, but that's messy and it drops on you. So we just took wooden shims and pounded them in place. I mean, the styrofoam's quite light. And we were going to put a second layer underneath those. So we just put the first layer up almost temporarily. And once we got all the first layer done, then we ordered the second layer, and it was not so thick. The first layer's about 10 inches thick. The second layer's roughly about 4 inches thick. And the second layer's screwed into the pieces of wood, so the second layer holds the first layer up. It can never fall down. But now our floor is basically about 14 inches of EPS foam, so it's warm to the touch all winter.
I think we've covered most of the house in terms of insulation, haven't we? We've done the walls, we've done the ceiling and down underneath the house. What happened next?
Gosh, what was next? In the initial work, we had put in the heat recovery ventilator system, and that's always performed flawlessly. And my wife can hardly stand going into some buildings now because you're used to that really nice fresh air, no odors, no staleness. So that went smoothly. We noticed in talking to other experts that because our concrete foundations come right up underneath the floor, that there would be the thermal bridge right under the exterior walls. And we had actually considered lifting the entire house up, but it would have just been wildly expensive and caused them to destroy half the concrete foundations. So what we did is we actually hired college students to dig about 3 feet of soil away from the house on all the sides. And then we added styrofoam blocks to the outside of the foundations, and then a 2-inch layer of foam glass, because foam glass is impervious to insects, rodents, UV, it's waterproof. So it's a nice kind of armor that's insulating as well. So we added that to the outside, and that's helped the energy performance of the house. A couple other things that we've done in the following years. I had learned about clothes drying cabinets when I was a Passivhaus consultant, yet no one sold them in the United States. And a clothes drying cabinet is this fantastic way of using the air that's already moving through your house with a ventilation system to run that air through hanging clothes to dry them. And we had always done that just by hanging clothes in the bathroom, but for something that's a little bit tidier, we wanted a cabinet. And we had a hard time finding one, but ultimately did find one. And so the air is pulled into the top of the cabinet. The cabinet's about 6 feet tall, 2 feet square. It's just a metal white metal box, basically, with a door on the front. And you hang up clothes on the racks in the dryer, close the door and hit the setting, and basically it'll either pump fresh air from the house and without heat, or it will heat the air from the house. It goes in, circulates to the clothes, and then pulls out and goes back through our ventilation system. So, people joke about heat your house with a hairdryer. I obviously have no need for a hairdryer, being bald, since the day I turned 30. So we now say that we heat our house with our clothes dryer, because all the warm, moist air goes out of the clothes dryer and goes to the HRV, where the moisture is ejected to the outside, but the heat is recovered through the heat transfer core. So it's worked out quite nicely. This is the first full winter that we've experienced, and I can see a drop in our energy consumption. So
I've never heard that one before.
Okay.
In terms of the air tightness, once you'd done all this work, was there a lot that surprised you, or were you hitting the air tightness that you wanted fairly quickly?
Yeah. So we have had, I think, 4 tests at different stages of construction, and we thought that the walls, we were hoping that, we'd put the Larsen trusses around and we'd be, 0.4 and we'd rock and go out for beers. And it didn't happen that way. It was more like, well, you're down to about 1.0. So then in the process of doing the attic and the floor, it came down even lower. And then we taped and caulked the electrical boxes. We taped where the walls meet the floor. And we did a little bit more air tightening when we put the insulation on the outside of the foundations. And we think we're right around someplace between 0.5 and 0.7. We will get a final blower door test this fall. So we'll either make Interfit standard, or with any luck, maybe the new Passivhaus standard.
Are there any other stages or parts of this before we get towards the end and start seeing how is this for you?
Yeah. So we're doing a couple other things that are kind of, it's your own house, so you could try it. We're using foam insulation to trim around the outside of the windows and the inside of the windows, because that's a common thermal bridge. And I just wanted to try it to see if that would work. The clothes drying cabinet we call Lady Asko, because she's tall and white and made in Sweden. The girls call the HRV, they call him Harvey. So Lady Asko's next to Harvey. Those have been done, and there's really not much to do. The only other thing that we've got is we're putting in a light well. Our kitchen doesn't have a window in it, and so it gets a little dark in the corner, and we upgraded to all LED lights, but it's still, you hate to turn on lights if you don't need to. So the room above our kitchen actually has 2 windows, one on each side, and where they coincide, it's always nice and bright. So we're actually going to put a plate glass panel in that floor, so the light will come down into the dark corner of our kitchen. So the idea is that we'll do light recycling. So that will finish the project, and I'm hoping that we'll have that by the end of the year.
And all of the time you were in and using the house?
Yeah, we lived in the house even without sheetrock and without any insulation. All the fall that we did the walls, we were gone out of the house for about 10 days when they were hanging new sheetrock and plastering it. And then for one day, the painter came in and painted the downstairs. And then we made a family project of painting the upstairs. We made it a family project to put on the siding on the front of the house. It's been a family project to repaint the outside of the house. Yeah.
Here we go then. Here is the $1 million question then. Was it all worth it?
Yeah. My 17-year-old daughter will never admit it, at least probably until I'm dying, and she wants to be sweet to me. But she's really proud of us. She's kind of embarrassed when we talked about our project with her friends, but she said some things that make it pretty clear that she's proud of what we've done. My youngest daughter, not being such an old teenager, is genuinely proud of what we've done. And they both, well, my oldest daughter feels that, she says, there's no hope. We're all going to die. Climate change is just going to take us all out. I've never talked to my youngest daughter about climate change, but you have to take action. You can't wait for other people to do it. I mean, almost the worst thing that happened in America was when Obama got elected, because then it's kind of like, well, Obama's going to take care of everything. He's going to, sign the climate change legislation. He's going to put a tax on carbon. He's going to fund everyone, doing this. And it's so unrealistic.
But none of this really we should leave to anyone else, which I think is probably what you're trying to say.
Yes.
There is a side for politicians to set laws and agree this and that. I think it does come down to assessing our lives, seeing where we're at, and then just constantly trying to improve it.
Exactly. And that's what angers me, is a lot of people are waiting for the politicians to take care of this problem. You cannot wait for politicians. You need to jump in. And that's what's exciting to us. Since we've done our project, we've met other people that have retrofit their houses and other people that have come on tours that are saying, I'm going to do this. And they're genuine. And they may not do as extensive a job, but I know they're going to do it. And I've seen some of them start, and they're under no misconception that it's going to be easy or cheap, and yet they're going to do it. So the revolution begins with you. And I think the biggest advocate has been my wife. She jokingly said, Tad, it's either, paying this $100,000 to retrofit our house, or you could go, get a PhD. So consider this project your PhD. But she's totally on board with it. She's become probably more adept spokesperson for Passivhaus than I am. And I think it's been, for our family, a kind of a cool project. We're not the Swiss Family Robinson. We didn't get on a ship and go someplace, but we did take our family into effective action to, solve this crisis that requires everyone's best efforts.
And finally, if someone is thinking about retrofitting their property, realizing how big a job is, can you give any advice?
Yeah. The advice I give you is talk to everyone who has any remote chance of helping you. And you will find that without exception, they'll provide something that's helpful. My dad, when we were doing the project, he was pretty ill. He was in really bad health. And he would still sit on his window and ask me what we've done and say, time to get it done. My mom said, if you guys run out of money and need more money, just let us know and we'll loan you the money to get it done. And she actually came over and helped paint, because she's perfectly good house painter, at 87 years old. And my older sister were really close. She was the best worker, because a lot of the men that came on the job, kind of traditional contractors and carpenters, they'd always question you, well, why are you getting it so airtight? Let's just do it, and get it done. My sister just, well, what do you want me to do? And then she worked meticulously. She is the best person for making the house airtight. I've got a list of 50 people that I asked for help. Some of them I paid, but they always provided more expertise than what I was paying them. And actually, the only times I got into trouble was when I tried stuff and didn't check it out with my friends. So what you find in the Passivhaus community is this intense realization that we all can learn a lot from each other. And we've all made enough mistakes that we might as well tell each other, the mistakes we've made.
Tad, really enjoyed this. Thank you very much.
Cool.
Every podcast we release comes with online show notes, and they do what we can't do in audio. So we have photos, we have links, additional resources. For this episode, you can see before and after photos of Tad's house. Tad's been monitoring the performance of his house, and it goes back quite a long way as well, I think to the early 2000s. So there's a downloadable spreadsheet of how things have improved. And there's all the regular stuff, the key points from our chats. I've got links to Tad, houseplanninghelp.com/93. Every so often after I do an interview, I hear back from that person saying, I'm not sure I made this clear, or I wanted to put in this point. And Tad got in touch wanting to stress the main reason he remodeled his house was to lower the energy consumption. I think we got that, but I wanted to mention it again because he was concerned about that. houseplanninghelp.com/93, and that will also link you across to his website where he's got lots more information about it. Got a quick update on the Hub before I head out of here, and also a call to action. So the Hub is the membership area of House Planning Help that we've been doing bits and pieces for behind the scenes. Let me explain what's been going on. First of all, a quick review of what it is. I've found a lot of benefit from going on site on various projects, whether they are at the early stages, in the middle, or towards the ends, and just getting more information about them. I've tried to put that into podcasts as well. However, I think in video form, there's a lot that we could be doing. And that's the idea of this hub. We're going to be leaning on video quite heavily. It's going to be work in progress for a while, if I'm totally honest. And some of that video that we captured has been on Long Barrow. You might remember, if you've been with us for a while, that Alex Baines, he's building his own house, and we've been following that since the beginning of 2015. I haven't released any of it yet. It's because we've been building it up for our membership hub when all that goes live. Plus, in here, there'll be a course which will constantly be upgraded as we work out the flaws with it. So it's not going to be perfect to begin with, but we will be looking for guinea pigs, charter members, whatever you would like to call yourself, perhaps 30 to 50 people who can come in here. You'll get it at a reduced rate that will go for your lifetime membership if you maintain that. And then we'll want you to test drive and feedback and say, Ben, this is rubbish, or Ben, this was brilliant, just so we know what the good bits are, what the not so good bits are, and it will be constant improvement. That's how I see it anyway. So I thought I'd just fill you in on what's going on there. It's a lot of work behind the scenes. We will get there eventually. It's a bit like you go and look at plots of land, for example, and it's just discouraging. You spend a lot of time arranging, oh, I'm going to go and take a look round here, and then you turn up and within 10 seconds you think, no, it's not quite right. Maybe I'm being too picky. My call to action today is to write a review of the podcast in iTunes. It works on a number of levels. Validation to others that there's useful information in this podcast. And also, it could well bump us up the rankings on iTunes. And that means more people find us. We can share this message. So let's give an example review here. Hi to The Geck, who's based in the UK. And the title of this review is Useful, Encouraging and Inspiring. 5 stars. I've been listening to the podcast since the beginning and have found it a very good source of useful information and discussion. As a self-build wannabe, restricted by finance and frustrated with the standard of housing, especially now we live in the Scottish Highlands. Oh, that's a lovely area of the world. Looking to create a better, healthier and more environmentally sound home is a dream. One day, perhaps, but in the meantime, I shall continue to follow Ben's project. Many thanks, James. Lovely review. So if you can get on iTunes, and if you haven't done it already, we do appreciate your honest reviews. Next time, Brian Murphy is my guest as we run down 10 insulation types and why you might specify them. Insulation is always one of those topics it's not necessarily a dream 30-minute podcast on insulation, but it's useful. So that's why we go in there. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.